Donald Trump has been in an internet feud lately with former president of Russia and former prime minister Dmitry Medvedev, leading to an escalating series of military threats, including nuclear weapons, apparently. So, what is the root of this feud? And it goes back a couple of months. So back in March, when Trump was really getting started on some of his diplomatic efforts between Ukraine and Russia, he made some comments about how Putin was, quote, playing with fire in regard to the war. To which Medvedev replied, quote, regarding Trump's words about Putin playing with fire and really bad things happening to Russia, I only know of one really bad thing, World War III. I hope Trump understands this. Not lead immediately too much, but it seems as though Trump got a negative impression from Medvedev until the more recent series of bickering that happened within this last week, which was Trump. He said that there would be a 50-day warning time before that the United States would begin implementing tariffs on countries that work with Russia. But when it comes to this, that led to Medvedev and Trump exchanging words. Medvedev then claimed Trump's playing with this ultimatum game with Russia, 50 days or 10. You should remember two things. One, Russia isn't Israel or even Iran. And two, each new ultimatum is a threat and a step towards war, not between Russia and Ukraine, but with his own country. Don't go down the Sleepy Joe road, referring, of course, to former U.S. President Joe Biden. And it appeared as though Trump took this threat very seriously, even though it was posted on social media. So Trump responded, quote, based on the highly provocative statements of the former president of Russia, Dmitry Medvedev, who is now the deputy chairman of the Security Council of the Russian Federation, I have ordered 2 nuclear submarines to be positioned in the appropriate regions. What the appropriate regions are is not fully clear. Nuclear submarines, their whole point is that they're kind of ready at any time. So the exact nature of this threat is secretive, but it led to some more escalations. And at first, it seemed as though Medvedev was benched to stop him from doing anything too extreme, such as threatening the United States into a war via tweets. And it seemed as though it was cooling off. And it seemed as though that would be the end of it. But then the Russian Foreign Ministry issued a statement withdrawing their moratorium on the deployment of medium and short-range missiles, saying that it was, quote, the result of NATO countries' anti-Russian policy. Now, it's very unlikely that this change in policy is solely because of a Trump feud, but we were talking missiles, and it led to missiles. Now, this state of affairs seems to have already cooled off, and in fact, there are currently some negotiations happening between the United States and Russia, where it has not yet seemed to have taken center stage. But we think that it's important to say who Medvedev is and what these threats actually mean. So this is a new series of short explainers from the New Voice of Ukraine. For more coverage of Ukraine, please go to english.nv.ua, one of Ukraine's leading independent sources of news in English. Go to patreon.com/nvua to support us financially and in exchange receive premium benefits, including input on what these explainers are. And on to the show. Dmitry Medvedev. He's a complicated figure with 2 very different types. We're going to again start from the very beginning. Where does Dmitry Medvedev come from? And Medvedev's political career began in Russia, in the office of the mayor of St. Petersburg. At the time, Mayor Andrei Sobchak was one of the leaders in what was seen as the reformist democratic wing of Russian politics. Those hopes seem to die, as we'll see through the course of Medvedev's career, but that's where he began. Especially, he was working in the Committee for Foreign Affairs, dealing with foreign investments in a very critical time in St. Petersburg's history. And he was working under his boss, Vladimir Putin. And this was the beginning of a hideous relationship between Medvedev and Putin that carries on until today. Beginning in this 1990s era, Putin and Medvedev worked very closely together and was his loyal servant, to the point that when Putin ran for president, well, he didn't really run, it was a very rigged system, but ran for president in the year 2000, Medvedev was Putin's campaign manager. Silly to think of actual electoral politics in this context, but titles are titles. And Medvedev's role in the Putin government continued until he was eventually made the deputy prime minister, and everyone saw that as declaring that he would be Putin's successor, because at the time, Putin was running out of terms. He could only be president for 2 terms, and that was going to run out in the year 2008. So as Putin's term limits are over, he is replaced by Dmitry Medvedev. Though, again, with all these terms, not really. At the time, this was seen as a positive move for Russia. Medvedev was seen by Western partners as the reformer, the westernizer. And though Putin's relationship with the West was not exactly bad, there were still some frictions. He was still seen even then as a bit of an autocrat, and Medvedev would be the one to fix this, and so had a lot of enthusiasm from the West. He was seen as an enforcer of anti-corruption measures, as smoothing over some of the disagreements that Russia had with Western countries. But behind the scenes, this was not the case. As he was reforming the country, what was really happening was that he was continuing the process of centralizing Russian politics under the United Russia Party. By now, that's another obsolete way of understanding Russian politics. But at the time, the United Russia was Putin's. With Putin not quite in full Putin yet, it was seen as having a need to have a full political party to back up this power. So already there was those indications that he was not quite the reformer that people made him out as, though there was a lot of denial. And the height of that denial came very, very early in Medvedev's term, which was the invasion of Georgia. In 2008, following some border skirmishes between Russia and the Russia-supported breakaway province of South Ossetia, Russia invaded Georgia, sacked the city of Gori, and came very, very close to attacking the capital, Tbilisi, before eventually being called off. Now, this invasion of a foreign country should have been seen as much more of a warning for what we have now. But already, in the very next year, March of 2009, there was the reset, where U.S. President Obama and Hillary Clinton decided to reset their poor relations with Russia from the Georgian War. One of the biggest mistakes leading to where we are now, and showing once again that while Medvedev was welcomed as a westernizer, he was in action perhaps even more aggressive than the first 2 terms of Vladimir Putin, including what was called the Medvedev Doctrine, that Russia would step in to protect Russian minorities, what we see in the justifications used in this war. But the warnings then were not heard. So then at the end of Medvedev's presidential term in 2012, Putin comes back. This is not fully expected and during all this time, Putin, who was supposed to have stepped aside from power following his presidential term limits, simply became prime minister. And during this time, it became understood to those who truly understood it that Putin was continuing to run the country, and only going through some legal steps of what his exact title would be while doing that. So that takes us to the end of 2012, and Putin, since he already sat out his refresher time, to become president once again. And so, in 2012, Putin moves back into the presidency. At the time, there was a large series of protests in Russia that were called the Bolotnaya protests off of the area of Moscow where they were happening, that was not happy with the return of Putin and what that meant for the future autocracy of Russia. And this is where modern Russia begins. Putin threw away the constitutional order to come back into power, and to put down these protests, he activated much more nationalist ideology in order to rally the people behind him. Bolotnaya is definitely worth an explainer in the future, but just know that Bolotnaya protests of 2011 to 2013 were the beginning of what we now call late-stage Putinism, the full autocratic return of power, and it was all orchestrated through Medvedev. After leaving the presidency for Putin's return, he himself became prime minister, and with Putin fully asserting himself, he was not needed as much as he used to be in the past. In 2020, there is a sweep through the Russian political system where all the ministers get replaced, and he steps aside, but he remains close to Putin as his loyal bagman. And that brings us to the second and most recent stage of Medvedev's career, which is crazy internet troll Medvedev. Now, Medvedev certainly has position. He is on the Security Council and is moved around in various positions related to security, still very high up in the executive branch of the Russian government. But his real job is just being a buffoon on the internet. Since the full-scale invasion in 2022, he has been one of the biggest cheerleaders for the most aggressive, ultra-nationalistic, genocidal, frankly, vision of Russia's goals in Ukraine. Now, his list of statements are long, so we don't have to go through all of them. But just to give a sampler, he has said, for example, quote, "The existence of Ukraine is fatally dangerous for Ukrainians, and that they will understand that life in a large common state is better than death, their deaths and the deaths of their loved ones. And the sooner Ukrainians realize this, the better." Threatening to kill all Ukrainians if they don't accept being absorbed by Russia. And this happens all the time. He threatens Ukrainians with genocide on a weekly basis. He threatens to nuke Britain and France and the Baltic states and just says all the crazy things that Russian nationalists say. And that is kind of how people have taken this recent argument with Donald Trump. It just says crazy stuff, don't take him seriously. Trump fell for trolling, basically. But that is a misunderstanding of who Medvedev is. As I've been explaining, he is a loyal lieutenant of Vladimir Putin. He does what he is told. He serves the role he needs to serve. He does not do anything without the approval of Vladimir Putin. And if he did something that was against Putin's wishes, he would no longer have his position. It is not two separate Medvedevs. It is not the old Medvedev, the centrist, modernizing technocrat versus Medvedev, the drunken buffoon. They're the same person still. At the time, Putin needed his technocrat. Now he needs his buffoon. It's the same thing. Medvedev says the crazy things that Russia wants to say, but cloaked in a clown's outfit. A lot of you may do the same thing. You want to introduce an idea that you don't exactly know will go over very well, so you kind of half-jokingly introduce the idea to the group in hopes that if people don't like it, they'll just laugh it off. And if they do like it, maybe start to increase the seriousness. That is what he is doing for Russia. He says the crazy things that the West can laugh off if they want to, and that's what they have done with this Trump-Medvedev feud. They can laugh it off. But ultimately, what he says is never very different from actual Kremlin policy. If you listen to Russian media, if you watch Russian TV, if you read Russian Telegram channels, he's not saying anything unusual. He's just saying it in English. And this divide between English and Russian has always been the big problem between the understanding of Russia and the West. They're a bit less crazy when they speak English. So that's where we are. This feud seems to be tapering off. However, do not be confused that this isn't something that Putin would have wanted. Do not be confused that Medvedev was saying anything outside the scope of the Russian government. It's just that sometimes Russia likes to present its thoughts through the mouth of a drunken buffoon.